The streets of suburban Atlanta were silent under the cover of night, with only the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. The streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, their warm glow flickering in the damp air. The city's pulse felt distant, muted by the miles of residential homes that separated Samuel Lawson from downtown. A storm seemed imminent, but for now all was quiet. Inside his black Cadillac, Samuel leaned back, trying to unwind after a long day. As the Attorney General of Georgia, his job didn't end at the office. He spent most of his days navigating the complexities of legal battles, corruption cases, and the fight for justice. Tonight had been no different. Allegations of systemic failures, high-profile cases, and the constant pull of money influencing law. He had been thinking about all of it during his drive home, his mind still spinning from the weight of the day. The road ahead was mostly empty, save for the occasional parked car in driveways. The stillness of the suburban streets gave him a momentary sense of peace, but that peace was shattered in an instant when he saw the flash of headlights in his rearview mirror. A Mercedes G-Wagon came speeding past him, its engine roaring like a beast released from captivity. Samuel's hand gripped the steering wheel tighter as he watched the car swerve violently around a bend, narrowly missing a pedestrian at the crosswalk. His pulse spiked. A drunk driver, he thought. The reckless speed, the near miss with a person. He had seen it all before. Samuel's instincts kicked in. He pressed down on the gas, following the car at a careful distance. This wasn't a pursuit for glory. It was to prevent another tragedy. He had seen enough innocent lives shattered by people who thought they could get away with anything. 2 miles later, the G-Wagon jerked to the right and pulled into a gas station. Samuel slowed his car and parked at the far end of the lot. The gas station was old, with faded neon lights flickering above. The pumps looked worn, and the convenience store was small and dimly lit. Samuel could see the cashier leaning on the counter, scrolling lazily through his phone. There was no sense of urgency here, no sign of the chaos unfolding outside. Samuel's attention shifted back to the G-Wagon. The driver's door opened and a girl stumbled out. Blonde, barely 15 if he had to guess. Her steps were uncoordinated, and her hands fumbled as she reached for the gas pump. Samuel didn't need to see her face to know she was drunk. The stench of alcohol was overpowering. He got out of his car, walking toward her with purpose. This wasn't about showing authority. This was about stopping her before she got back in that car. "Hey," Samuel said, his voice firm but calm. "You've been drinking. You're underage and you can't drive." The girl turned toward him, her eyes glazed and unfocused. For a brief moment, she looked confused, and then her lips curled into a sneer. "Oh my God," she slurred. "What are you? The hall monitor?" "You're a danger to yourself and everyone else on this road," Samuel said, blocking her path as she tried to move toward her car. "Call someone to pick you up." She rolled her eyes, clearly dismissing him. "Why don't you mind your business?" she scoffed. "I'm stopping you because you're too drunk to be behind the wheel," Samuel replied, standing his ground. Her face twisted into something more menacing, her voice rising. "Who the hell do you think you are?" she spat. "You don't get to tell me what to do." Samuel remained calm, his posture firm but unthreatening. He wasn't here to argue, he was here to protect. But before he could say anything else, her expression changed. She stepped back, her body language shifting. She opened her mouth and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Help! Help! He's attacking me! He's trying to hurt me!" The words sliced through the air, sharp and desperate. Inside the store, the cashier froze. The man by the pump stiffened. People started to turn toward them. Samuel could feel the weight of the moment settle on him. A frightened young white girl, clutching her arms in fear, and a tall, strong black man standing in front of her. He had seen this before. The narrative shifting, the assumptions forming, the game already being played. But Samuel didn't flinch. He knew how this was going to play out, but he also knew the truth would eventually come to light. He just had to make sure it did. The sound of sirens began to slice through the night air, distant at first but growing louder with every passing second. Samuel knew that the moment the police arrived, everything would shift. He could feel it, the subtle tension building, the collective breath being held by everyone around him. The scene was set, and the script had already been written. A frightened girl, a man who towered over her, and the weight of racial perceptions ready to tip the scales. Lily Anderson, the young girl, stood in front of her car, clutching her arms as though trying to protect herself from a threat that wasn't there. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with feigned panic. The performance was flawless, as though she had rehearsed it 1,000 times. And Samuel could see it. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't about fear, this was about manipulation. The first police cruiser pulled into the lot, its blue and red lights painting the pavement in jagged streaks. The second followed close behind. The officers stepped out of their cars, their hands hovering near their holsters. Samuel stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable, as the officers approached. His hands remained by his sides, not in a defensive posture, but with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing the truth. As the officers walked toward him, Lily immediately broke into a fresh round of hysterics, her voice shaking with practiced terror. Mom, please, hurry!" she cried into her phone, her words spilling out in a frantic rush. "There's this scary man. He tried to hurt me. He wouldn't leave me alone. I'm so scared, Mom. Please help." Samuel's heart sank. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He had been through too many courtroom battles, too many cases where the truth was buried under the weight of lies and manipulation. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to twist a narrative, but it was different this time. There was too much at stake. Just as Lily's mother, Victoria Anderson, skidded into the parking lot in her black Cadillac Escalade, Samuel's mind raced. The moment she stepped out of the vehicle, the atmosphere in the gas station shifted. Victoria was a force, a woman who held authority like a weapon. Her tall, commanding figure seemed to fill the entire lot, her uniform pristine, her badge glinting in the light. Victoria's gaze swept over the scene, calculating and cold. When her eyes locked with Samuel's, he knew this wasn't just about her daughter. This was about power, control, and Victoria had already decided who was guilty. "Victoria, you have to listen," Samuel began, his voice calm but steady. "I didn't touch her. I was trying to stop her from driving drunk." Victoria's expression hardened, her jaw tightening. She didn't give him a chance to explain. "Cuff him!" she barked, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. One of the officers stepped forward, his hand reaching for the cuffs. Samuel didn't resist, didn't flinch. He knew the game they were playing, but he also knew he wasn't going to be their scapegoat. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice low but firm. "You haven't even asked what happened. You're just taking her word?" Victoria didn't even look at him as the cuffs clicked into place, locking around his wrists. "I have all the information I need," she said coldly. "My daughter is a victim, and that's all that matters." Samuel's mind raced, but his expression remained neutral. He knew what was coming next. They were going to arrest him, take him in, and twist the facts. But he wasn't just some defendant. He wasn't some ordinary man caught in a lie. He was the Attorney General of Georgia, and he wasn't about to let this stand. As the officers led him toward the patrol car, Samuel's gaze swept over the scene. He could see the bystanders, the people who had witnessed this. Some were already pulling out their phones, capturing what they believed to be the truth. But it wasn't the truth, not yet. Victoria's cold eyes never left him, and Samuel felt the weight of her judgment. But he also knew the truth would come out. Soon it would all be revealed. And when that happened, the narrative would shift again. This time, he would be the one in control. The ride to the precinct was eerily quiet. Samuel sat in the back of the patrol car, his wrists still bound by the cold metal cuffs. The city blurred by in streaks of neon and shadow, but his mind was focused, sharp despite the tension. This wasn't the first time he'd been in a situation like this, unjustly accused, facing a system that was stacked against him. But tonight, there was something different. The stakes were higher, and he could feel it. As the car pulled into the precinct parking lot, Samuel's body remained still, his posture straight. His calm was deliberate. He had fought bigger battles than this. Courtrooms full of corrupt officials, billionaires manipulating the system, and institutions that thought they could bend the law. But tonight, he wasn't just a prosecutor. He was the target. When the door swung open, a couple of officers stepped forward, pulling him out of the car. Samuel moved without resistance, his gaze unwavering. He didn't flinch as they led him inside. The officers processed him like any other suspect, their faces unreadable. But Samuel knew what they saw: a black man in cuffs, arrested for allegedly harassing a white girl. It was the story that had been written for him before he even stepped into the station. Inside, the precinct was as sterile as he expected. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow over everything. Officers paused mid-conversation when he entered, their eyes darting toward him. Some recognized him immediately, but others only saw what they'd been told. A man accused, a victim already decided. They led him into an interrogation room. It was cold, dimly lit, with a metal table bolted to the floor. Samuel took a seat, folding his hands in front of him. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't going to beg. He had been through too much to let fear take hold now. He knew the truth would come out, but it would take time. It would take effort, and he was ready to fight for it. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above. Samuel sat there waiting. He wasn't anxious. He had fought bigger battles in courtrooms, had seen the law twisted and manipulated for the benefit of the powerful. But this was different. This wasn't a case of just defending the law. This was personal. He had been falsely accused, and the truth had to come out. The door to the interrogation room creaked open, and Samuel's eyes snapped toward it. Victoria Anderson stepped inside. She was every bit the image of authority, tall, composed, her uniform perfect. Her eyes, however, betrayed something else. A flicker of doubt, a spark of realization that maybe, just maybe, the narrative she had built for herself was about to crumble. Samuel didn't speak at first. He didn't have to. His calm demeanor was enough to show that he was in control of this moment. Victoria walked slowly around the table, sizing him up like a predator assessing its prey. Her steps were deliberate, measured. She was playing a game, and she thought she had already won. "I have to admit, I expected more from you, Samuel," she said, her voice smooth, dripping with condescension. "But I guess all those years of playing the hero couldn't protect you now, could they?" Samuel didn't rise to her bait. He sat back in his chair, watching her carefully. "I don't know what you think you've won here," he said, his voice low but steady. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Victoria smirked, leaning in slightly. "You really think you can outplay me? You think your legal tricks will get you out of this?" She stepped closer, her face inches from his. "You attacked my daughter, tried to hurt her. You think you'll just walk away from that?" Samuel met her gaze, unwavering. "Check the cameras. You'll see the truth." Victoria's lip curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Oh, we will," she said with a mocking laugh. "But you see, Samuel, the truth isn't what matters here. The truth is what I say it is, and I'm the one in control." Samuel let the silence hang for a moment. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, but he wasn't intimidated. Victoria was playing her hand, but she didn't realize that Samuel had one card left to play. Samuel sat still, not responding immediately. His gaze never left Victoria. He could see the cracks in her confidence, the subtle shift in her posture, the way her eyes darted to the door as if waiting for something. She was playing her game, but Samuel wasn't going to let her win without a fight. "Tell me something, Victoria," Samuel said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "Do you really think you can bury the truth like this? You think your daughter's lies are enough to make everything go away?" Victoria stiffened, her hands subconsciously twitching toward the baton at her waist. She took a step back, her eyes narrowing, but Samuel wasn't done yet. He knew she was used to winning. He knew she relied on her authority, her status. But that wasn't going to work here. "I'm not some low-level suspect you can steamroll with your power and connections," he continued, his voice unwavering. "You think you're the one in control? You don't even know who you're up against." For a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. Samuel leaned forward just slightly, as though letting his words settle into the space between them. Victoria's expression faltered just a little, just enough to show that she was starting to doubt the narrative she had so carefully built. Then, with one smooth motion, Samuel lifted his hand, still bound by the cuffs, and reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Victoria's eyes snapped to his wrist, her muscles tensing in anticipation. For a moment, she looked ready to spring into action, but Samuel didn't move any faster. His movement was deliberate, controlled, calm. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice cold, but with a note of uncertainty now. "I'm just getting my ID," Samuel said, his tone casual. "Don't worry, I'm not going to try anything." Victoria hesitated, her fingers hovering near her baton, before giving a small nod. The officer standing beside Samuel stepped forward, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a gold-plated badge. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its surface catching the light in a way that made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. The room fell into a stunned silence. The officer holding the badge blinked and then glanced between Samuel and Victoria, his face paling as realization began to settle in. "I am Samuel Lawson," he said, letting the name hang in the air. "Attorney General of Georgia." For the first time that night, Victoria's composure cracked. Her eyes flickered, and her mouth went dry as she processed what he had just said. She took a step back, her expression shifting from one of confidence to something more like confusion. Samuel didn't give her time to recover. He watched her intently, letting the weight of his words sink in. Victoria's lips parted as if she was about to say something, but no words came. She was too stunned to respond. The officer holding the badge slowly lowered it, his eyes wide with the realization that this wasn't just any man. They had arrested one of the most powerful figures in the state. Samuel let the silence stretch. He could see the fear now, flickering behind Victoria's cold facade. She had thought she was in control, but now she was starting to understand the mistake she had made. "Check the cameras," Samuel repeated, his voice calm but firm. "You'll see exactly what happened. My car's dash cam, the security footage. It'll all tell the truth." Victoria didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. Samuel could see the shift in her. She was no longer the powerful woman who could control the situation with a single word. Now she was facing a man who knew the game better than she ever could, and she was starting to lose. "I want the footage," Samuel said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I want it secured and officially entered into record. No games, no manipulation." Victoria straightened, but her hands were clenched into fists. The tightness in her jaw betrayed her, and for the first time, she wasn't the one holding the power. "Fine," she said, her voice tight, forced. "But this won't be over. You'll regret this." Samuel didn't flinch. "We'll see about that," he said softly, but with a certainty that left no room for doubt. "Because after tonight, you won't just have a career to worry about. You'll have a whole lot more." The room was thick with tension as Victoria Anderson stood frozen, her expression tightening with the weight of her loss. For the first time that night, she seemed vulnerable, unsure of her next move. Her grip on her composure was slipping, and Samuel knew it. The silence hung in the air, only broken by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Victoria's hands curled into fists, her knuckles white. She was no longer the powerful figure who had walked into the room with authority. Now she was just a woman realizing the gravity of her mistake. Her daughter's lies, her own manipulation, had all fallen apart. Samuel had shifted the game, and the truth was on his side. "I'll expect the footage within the hour," Samuel said, his voice calm and unyielding. "The dash cam from my car and the security footage from the gas station. I want it all cataloged, secured, and entered into record." Victoria's jaw tightened as she looked away from him. She knew what was coming. The moment the footage was retrieved, it would expose everything. The lie would unravel, and the false narrative she had built around her daughter's accusation would collapse. But Victoria wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. "You think this is over?" she said, her voice clipped, though she struggled to keep the venom in check. "You think you can just walk away from this?" Samuel stood slowly, his body rigid but unbowed. "I'm not walking away from anything. But you will," he said, his tone unwavering. "You'll walk away with nothing. No career, no reputation. Your badge, your gun. By morning, they'll be on my desk." Victoria inhaled sharply, her face flushing with fury. But even in her anger, Samuel could see it. The fear was there too, creeping beneath the surface. She knew the consequences of her actions. She knew the public would turn against her, and the department would distance itself from her. She wasn't as untouchable as she thought. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice rising. "I've built my career on this department, on my power. You don't know what you're dealing with." Samuel's eyes were cold, unwavering. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," he said, his voice steady. "And now, you're going to pay the price for everything you've tried to manipulate. Your daughter will be charged. Reckless endangerment, underage drinking, false reporting, obstruction. Every charge that applies." Victoria's hands trembled at her sides, the weight of her failure settling in. The public would know the truth soon enough. The cameras, the headlines, the investigation. It would all come to light. She had no escape from the fallout. "You won't win," she said weakly, as though trying to hold on to the last shred of control she had. "This isn't over." "Oh, but it is," Samuel replied, his voice low but sure. "You've already lost, and when the truth comes out, you won't have anything left." He turned toward the door, his back straight, his demeanor the epitome of resolve. Victoria didn't move, watching him with a mixture of rage and helplessness. For the first time in her career, she was powerless. As Samuel stepped into the hallway, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. This wasn't just about the false accusation against him. It wasn't just about protecting his name. This was about a larger fight, a fight against the corruption, the lies, the systems that twisted the truth to serve the powerful. Tonight, justice had not been silenced. Samuel knew that the road ahead would still be challenging. He had fought battles before, but this one was different. It was a victory for the truth, for accountability, for those who had been silenced for too long, and he would make sure it stayed that way. The door to the precinct closed behind him with a soft thud, the sound of finality. Samuel Lawson had won, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been overlooked, mistreated, or wronged by a broken system. As the precinct faded into the distance, Samuel's mind was already on the next steps, on the work still ahead. But tonight he knew that justice had, for once, been truly served.